So imagine getting up in the morning and not recognizing anyone that you live with that are in your house, or going to school and not knowing where your friends are. Like, you don't even know your classmate, you don't know your teachers. So according to Harvard University, 2% of the general population suffers from what is called Prosopagnosia, and most of us have never even heard of what that disorder is before. So there's a prevalence rate chart, and Prosopagnosia is about 2% of the general population, and we've all heard of schizophrenia and antisocial personality disorder before. If people want to go to a party and they avoid other people, you go, oh man, he's so antisocial. But that's actually only like 1% of the population, but we all know about that and not about prosopagnosia. So today, so I think it's a good time to learn and educate ourselves about what prosopagnosia is and how it affects people, so that we can understand the 2% of the population better, because they're usually mislabeled by the society as being rude or absent-minded and psychotic. So I'm going to take the time to tell you what it is and the two different types, which is developmental prosopagnosia and acquired. Prosopagnosia is the inability to recognize faces. It's also called face blindness. Recognizing faces is such an important part of society that so little part can tell you so many things about a person, such as what gender they are, just from looking at their face. So there's a section in the brain called the right fusiform gyrus, which is dedicated just to recognizing the faces that you see and connecting it to a memory of who that person is. And having prosopagnosia is usually described as being really hard and really scary, because imagine you don't recognize anyone. And it also affects your ability to navigate, because you can't recognize your own house as well. It affects that. So now that you know what it is, let's look at the different types of the disorder. The first type that we're going to look at is developmental prosopagnosia. Bowles et al. Wrote in this article that he defined it as individuals with no known history of brain injury and appearing to never properly develop the ability to tell faces apart. Adams, in his article, says that there's no gene that they can found that relates prosopagnosia, but it does tend to run in families. In the third article by Jones and Turnell, they explain that having developmental prosopagnosia has this upside, which is super verbal intelligence. And they studied a 5-year-old that had developmental prosopagnosia, and he had the reading ability and the verbal intelligence of a high school student. So that helped him navigate around, because he remembered the street names and store names to use as a landmark. So now that you know what developmental prosopagnosia is, let's look at the second type and the most common, which is acquired prosopagnosia. Usually people acquire it through an accident or a stroke that damages that certain part of the brain. One person who has prosopagnosia explains in an article that she started learning to recognize people by other cues, such as their hair, tattoos, scar, height, weight, and voice, to help her identify friends and families. But as you can see, the problem with that is that people cut their hair, they change their style, they curl it, or they remove their piercing, they got new one, they got new tattoos. So now that you know what prosopagnosia is and the two different types of it, and how they affect people in daily life, so now if someone comes up to you and say, I have prosopagnosia, which is, as you saw earlier, it's a lot more common than schizophrenia and antisocial personality disorder, you would know what it is and they could feel understood, because it's easily mislabeled. So now you can think about this. So how do you think How do you think watching a movie would be like if you had prosopagnosia?